This is my account, a measured record of a night when my routine patrol unveiled a secret buried deep beneath the familiar spaces of the airport. I offer these words not as a confession, but as a quiet testament to the hidden layers of this strange place. Layers that defy explanation and blur the line between the living and the dead. I had long become accustomed to the peculiar rhythms of the airport. By day, the terminal bustled with the ceaseless flow of arrivals and departures, punctuated by the overlapping voices of hurried travelers and the clatter of rolling suitcases. But by night, the airport transformed into a realm of reflective stillness. Under the pale glare of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of machinery in motion, I found myself alone with my thoughts and the echoes of forgotten time. Working the midnight shift gave me a unique perspective, a quiet window into a world where the ordinary softened into mystery, and subtle hints of the past stirred in the shadows. On one cool autumn evening, while patrolling near the maintenance wing, a part of the airport rarely frequented by anyone, I noticed something that did not belong to the well-known layout of the terminal. Tucked away behind a stack of disused crates nearly obscured by dust and neglect was a nondescript metal door. Its surface was marred by peeling paint and a small, rusted handle that hinted at long-forgotten use. I had passed that spot countless times without a second thought, yet that night it beckoned me with an inexplicable pull. My curiosity overrode my usual caution, and I approached the door. The lock yielded easily, as if expecting my hand. With a measured push, I swung it open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into profound darkness. A faint light from above struggled to illuminate the worn steps, while a cool, damp scent, reminiscent of ancient stone and the slow passage of years, enticed me to leave behind the predictable rhythm of my shift. Each step on the creaking staircase seemed to echo with the memories of ages past. The worn stone underfoot and the chill that seeped into my bones gradually pulled me away from the familiar hum of the airport above and into a realm that felt untouched by modernity. I reached a small landing where the dim beam of my flashlight revealed walls fashioned from rough-hewn stone. Their surfaces bore the marks of time, streaks of moisture and faded traces of what might once have been decorative motifs. This hidden space, so far removed from the gleaming corridors above, exuded an antiquated aura, as if its very architecture belonged to an era that had long since been consigned to history. The silence was complete, except for the measured sound of my footsteps and the distant drip of water, which punctuated the stillness like a metronome, counting down forgotten moments. At the far end of a narrow hallway that stretched from the landing, I encountered a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. Its surface was a palimpsest of time. Scratches, dents, and subtle gouges hinted at years of use, and perhaps even desperate attempts to keep its secrets hidden. With a cautious push, I eased the door open and stepped into a vast chamber that defied the sterile order of the modern airport above. In this underground sanctuary, the air was noticeably cooler, carrying with it an almost tangible weight of memory and sorrow. My flashlight beam swept over the expanse, revealing rows of old stone markers, each one weathered by the relentless passage of time. These markers were arranged with a solemn precision that formed an underground cemetery, a long-forgotten necropolis buried beneath the terminal. The space stretched out before me like an ancient memorial. Tombstones and crypts lay in orderly clusters, their inscriptions worn nearly beyond recognition by the erosion of countless years. Faded names, dates, and epitaphs whispered of lives once vibrant, lives filled with love, loss, joy, and regret. Yet amid the quiet dignity of the resting place, there was an undercurrent of unrest. At first, I attributed the subtle movements among the tombstones to a trick of the shifting light or the sway of old stone in a draft. But soon I realized that something far more inexplicable was at work. Faint, spectral silhouettes began to emerge, drifting between the markers with an almost ritualistic grace. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if compelled by an ancient duty to traverse these sacred grounds. The apparitions were not the stuff of immediate, visceral terror. Rather, they exuded a calm, persistent presence. There was a melancholy about them, a quiet insistence on being remembered. I saw a woman in a tattered dress, her figure ethereal and her eyes sorrowful, gliding silently between the graves. A man with a bowed head passed by with an air of resigned dignity, while a small child, barely more than a shadow, wandered as if searching for something lost. Their forms were vague in the dim light, and though their features were indistinct, I could sense that each carried a profound story, a memory of life that refused to be completely extinguished. Transfixed, I lingered among the tombs, trying to absorb every detail. The stone markers bore intricate carvings that spoke of eras when art and reverence were inseparable from death. Some inscriptions, though faded, hinted at tragedies that might have befallen these souls, perhaps the victims of a forgotten disaster or the casualties of an ancient conflict. Other markers were adorned with mysterious symbols reminiscent of motifs I had seen subtly integrated into the design elements of the modern terminal above. It was as if this underground cemetery had been deliberately preserved, a hidden repository for those whose lives were erased by time and progress. As I moved slowly along the narrow hallway that separated the graves, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew even colder, and an almost imperceptible murmur began to resonate, a sound like soft weeping mingled with the rustle of silk. I paused and strained my ears, feeling as if I were caught between two worlds, one of the living and one of those who had long passed away. It was then that I noticed the figures were not entirely content to remain in their eternal vigil beneath the stone markers. A subtle energy pulsed through the space, a connection that reached upward toward the modern realm above. I began to sense that the dead were not entirely at rest. Their presence seeped into the air, influencing the very fabric of the airport in subtle ways. I recalled previous shifts, moments when the normality of the night had been punctured by inexplicable sensations, a fleeting chill by an unattended baggage carousel, a reflection in a polished surface that did not match the surroundings, or a soft whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. At the time, I dismissed these as tricks of fatigue or the quirks of an old building. Now, standing in this underground necropolis, I understood that these occurrences were the echoes of a profound connection between the realms of the living and the dead. The cemetery was not a dormant relic. It was an active, spectral force that reached its influence upward, quietly haunting the spaces of the terminal with the lingering sorrow and memories of its inhabitants. As I ventured deeper into the cemetery, I encountered a spectral figure who would haunt my thoughts for many nights to come. A woman in a faded, once elegant gown drifted slowly toward me. Her eyes, though shadowed and indistinct, held an unspoken plea, as if begging for acknowledgement or a return to a forgotten past. For a long, suspended moment, we regarded one another, her expression one of quiet sorrow and longing, mine a mixture of empathy and wonder. I offered a slight nod, a silent greeting to her eternal vigil, and in that subtle exchange I sensed that she, and perhaps all the others, desired only to be remembered. There was no malice in her gaze, only an invitation to bear witness to their hidden history. Time seemed to lose meaning in that sacred space. I found myself moving almost as if in a trance, drawn from one grave to the next, examining the delicate etchings and worn inscriptions, each one a doorway into a life once lived. I pressed my hand against a particularly smooth stone, feeling the cool surface and the faint vibration of memories that might have been etched into its very fabric. Every so often the silence was broken by an almost imperceptible sound, a rustling of fabric, a soft sigh, or a faint echo of footsteps, each reminder that I was not alone among these hallowed grounds. Eventually, the weight of what I had witnessed pressed upon me. I realized that my time in this subterranean sanctuary was drawing to a close. With a heavy yet composed heart, I retraced my steps along the narrow hallway, feeling the spectral figures fade into the recesses of the darkness behind me. I ascended the creaking staircase, emerging once again into the familiar, if now subtly altered bustle of the airport terminal. The modern world above was alive with routine, announcements over the intercom, the steady hum of machines, and the ceaseless flow of travelers unaware of the secrets that lay beneath their feet. In the days and weeks that followed, the memory of that underground cemetery remained with me in ways I could not have foreseen. Late at night, while patrolling the now familiar halls of the terminal, I began to notice small, inexplicable anomalies. A traveler waiting alone in a seldom-used lounge might catch a glimpse of a translucent face reflected in a polished surface, a mournful visage that vanished as quickly as it appeared. An unattended bag at an empty gate would sometimes carry an inexplicable chill, as though touched by the cold hand of a restless spirit. Even the ambient lighting seemed to shift subtly in certain corners, as if hinting at the presence of those long departed. I started to hear murmurs from my colleagues, quiet remarks about strange sightings, unusual feelings of being watched, and unaccounted for shadows that flitted across their peripheral vision. One fellow security officer, usually a staunch skeptic, confessed that on one late shift he had seen a figure standing at the far end of a hallway, only to have it vanish when he turned on his flashlight. Another recounted a moment in which a passenger, on the verge of tears, whispered about a presence that made their skin crawl in an otherwise ordinary waiting area. Although these accounts were brief and easily dismissed as tricks of light or the strain of long hours, I knew all too well that something more was at play, an echo of that underground cemetery influencing the living spaces above. Night after night, I found myself haunted not only by the memory of the cemetery, but also by the subtle interactions between its denizens and the modern world. I began to document my observations in a log, detailing the spectral apparitions, the changes in atmosphere, and the inexplicable sensations that seemed to ripple through the terminal. My notes grew into a tapestry of occurrences, each entry a reminder that the dead, with their quiet persistence, continued to walk among us. Over time, I came to understand that the underground cemetery was more than a hidden relic. It was an integral part of the airport's identity. It served as a silent counterpoint to the ceaseless movement of travelers, a reminder that beneath the veneer of modernity, history, and memory resided in quiet persistence. The cemetery's influence was subtle but unmistakable, a spectral current that flowed upward into every corner of the terminal. It was as if the dead had not entirely left this world, but had woven themselves into its very fabric, ensuring that their stories, painful, beautiful, and forgotten, were never truly lost. One particularly long shift stands out in my memory. It was well past midnight, and the terminal was nearly empty. I found myself assigned to a secluded area near a row of glass windows that overlooked the runway. The soft glow of emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the polished floor. In one such reflective surface, I caught the unmistakable sight of a spectral figure standing quietly behind me. I spun around, half expecting to confront a living intruder, but there was nothing. Only the echo of my own racing heartbeat and the lingering chill of that otherworldly presence. Yet even then, I felt that gentle, sorrowful watchfulness of the cemetery below, extending its influence upward, blurring the boundary between life and death. In the quiet aftermath of that shift, as I sat in the break room poring over my log entries, I began to wonder about the origins of the underground cemetery. Had it always existed beneath the airport? Was it the final resting place for those who had perished in forgotten tragedies, victims of disasters or conflicts that time had swept away? Or was it perhaps a deliberate sanctuary, a repository for souls cast aside by the relentless march of progress, hidden away to preserve their dignity? I found no answers in the official records or in the hushed whispers of colleagues, only a growing certainty that this secret necropolis was as much a part of the airport as its gleaming glass facades and bustling concourses. Now, as I complete another night shift and prepare to resume my rounds, I carry with me the quiet, enduring knowledge of that hidden cemetery beneath the airport. I patrol the terminal with an ever-watchful eye, aware that the boundary between the living and the departed is far thinner here than most would suspect. Every shift brings new encounters, a fleeting glimpse of a spectral mourner, a sudden chill in an otherwise warm space, or the soft echo of footsteps that have no living source. These occurrences, far from being random, serve as a constant reminder that time is layered, and that every place, no matter how modern or bustling, holds within its stories that refuse to remain buried. This is my story, a measured account of an ordinary night turned quietly extraordinary. It is a chronicle of discovery, of silent vigils shared between the living and the dead, and of a connection that spans beyond the veil of mortality. I record these events in the hope that one day someone else may piece together the full tapestry of this strange airport, a place where modernity and memory coalesce, where every step taken in its vast halls might lead one to confront the quiet persistence of those who have long since passed away. And so I continue my duty, not just as a night shift worker, but as an inadvertent witness to a hidden world, a world where the dead roam their subterranean domain with gentle insistence, quietly haunting the lives of those who pass through, reminding us all that the past is never truly gone, but lives on in every whispered echo and every silent step in the darkness.